Hello, everybody. Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel. I have Dawn Michelle with me. Oh, wait, you're on that
I'm on this side this time. Hello.
We're doing another episode of our Tarot and Practice series, and today we're going to be talking about shadow work, which is very on point for this time of year, I feel like.
It's spooky season.
It's spooky season. I don't know why. I mean, I guess I do know why, but this is like the season when I feel like we're often thinking about things like shadow work and doing the deep, heavy stuff. Unless we're over it, and then we're just gonna skip. We'll skip it.
Yeah.
We'll do it some other time.
Yeah,
This
totally.
is the time of the year.
I've totally skipped spooky season times.
Yeah, I feel like I'm behind the seasons right now, actually. So I don't know. For me, it might come this year a little bit later, but I'm not quite in that mode just yet, actually. But
I feel like I just got into it, but that's probably because I just recorded, like, I did a little short spooky season series thing on my channel. And so now I feel like I'm in that. But like
now you're like geared up.
It took me getting out my decks that kind of resonate with that energy before I felt it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Spooky season time to bring out those decks, right?
Yep. So I thought we could kick this off by actually talking about, like, just in generally what the shadow is, what we mean when we say that, because I've seen so many like conversations over the years, especially in our sort of corner of YouTube, around like, you can't call this shadow, or you can call this shadow, or shadow work only means this, but it also means that. And like, maybe it's a psychological term, or maybe it's like a colloquial, like casual term. And like, what do we mean by it? And so I pulled up actually the wiki, because it's been like referenced so many times, to just give us like a baseline for what Wikipedia describes the shadow as. And this is going to be the psychological reference, and we'll probably pick this apart a little bit. But according to Wikipedia, it says, officially in analytical psychology, the shadow, also known as ego dystonic complex, repressed ID, shadow aspect, or shadow archetype, is an unconscious aspect of the personality that does not correspond with the ego ideal, leading the ego to resist and project the shadow. In short, the shadow is the self's emotional blind spot, projected as archetypes or metaphorical sense image complexes, personified within the collective unconscious. Is a lot of big words, i.e. the trickster. And I think what it's kind of saying is, like, these are parts of our personality that we reject because they don't align with how we see ourselves typically. And so we project them outward and sometimes personify them within us. So I think the point of all of that is just to basically say that that's how you can define it kind of psychologically, right? So I want to talk to you, though, with the psychological definition aside. What do you think the shadow is, or shadow work is? Well, actually, let's just start with the shadow. What do you think the shadow is?
Well, I've heard the shadow. It's so interesting because different circles of people who practice different types of magic, stuff like that, they all have this varying idea of what the shadow means. For me personally, because I think I wrap in, sure, a little bit of that psychological, but also I've got like a witchy background. I mean, I know I'm not active that way nowadays, but I do have a pretty big witchy background, that all of that gets played in, I think, to my understanding. And I agree with the unintegrated parts of self. I don't know that in my personal experience, it's always stuff we reject. Sometimes I think it's also stuff that's unseen, that we don't know, that we haven't acknowledged yet. So to my mind, shadow, the psychological definition always feels very negative to me. Same. And I feel like the same as with like tarot, I don't think it's inherently negative. I feel like it's like, I tend to use the language of it's what is unacknowledged or what is unseen, because sometimes that's not always a bad thing. Like, we can have positive traits that we just aren't bringing out into the open as well. So while I understand the psychological, the Jungian approach, like, I think it's really limiting to how people actually are.
I totally agree with that. I think it's funny because, like, I write about the shadow and positive, neutral, and negative qualities in the self-worth path. And it's funny because I have the exact same view as you on that point. I think that when you really pick apart the psychological definition, it kind of says anything that doesn't fit with the way, like, with your ego ideal. So the way you see yourself, which can be positive, neutral, or negative traits. Like, if you don't see yourself as a confident person, that confidence is going to be in your shadow. If you don't see yourself as a person willing to, like, compete or put yourself out there, that stuff's going to be in your shadow. So I think it still fits with the psychological definition, but I think it's like anything that's open to interpretation, because the way it's worded makes it sound like it's all negative stuff. We tend to box negative stuff into it. And it's funny because the way that I visualize the shadow, I have two very different ways of engaging with the concept of shadow. So I kind of visualize like an attic where everything's all boxed up. And these are all the things you've kind of just compartmentalized or tucked away for some reason. Either your subconscious did it to protect you in some way, or you've sort of consciously pushed that part of yourself away, either because you perceive it as negative or not lovable or not acceptable, or because society has convinced you of that, or because it's just uncomfortable in some way. And good stuff can make us uncomfortable, right? So when you go into your attic and you dig through boxes of memories, you're going to find things that make you sad and things that make you happy. It's the same exact thing. The other piece that I think I've never heard anybody else talk about, but it was how I first encountered the concept of shadow work, was actually, you mentioned being from witchy circles, and I have the same background. And I don't remember who, but somebody in the witchy circles when I was quite young described to me shadow work as the process. It started out having some alignment because they described it in the beginning as like the process of facing the parts of yourself that are uncomfortable. So that part lines up. But they described the shadow specifically as the thing that prevents you from doing that. So they basically said, I wish I could remember who told me this, but it stuck so hard. They basically said, when you start to dig into those parts of yourself that you've been avoiding, there's sort of this internal mechanism that tries to protect you from that. And you could see that as something personified as outside of yourself, but like this literal shadow creature that will get in the way and kind of prevent you from going where you're not ready to go. And it was a really interesting visual because it was almost like this internal self-protection mechanism becomes personified and blocks you from these parts of yourself that maybe you're not ready to access.
That's interesting. I've never heard that on it before.
And it's funny because I became, at that point, I was like probably 23, 24. I became determined to like meet this creature and like push my way past it and find whatever it was protecting, which is, it's interesting because that's the thing that motivated me to do shadow work before I really understood what shadow work was. Was like, I want to, like, I can do it. I can face this freaking shadow creature. Like, it's going to be fine.
I can slay the dragon.
Yeah, exactly. It like sort of motivated me to be like, I'm not afraid of you. Like, I can do it. But yeah, it didn't start out psychologically for me. It started out as a very like spiritual witchy practice of like, I want to know myself deeply. And I've just got to face this shadow creature to do it kind of thing. So that was my first dip actually into what the shadow was. It's wild.
That's kind of cool. I mean, I can totally see that energy. I like the sort of monster motif of that. Like the dark, creepy monster motif. I think that's really interesting. But I think like everything, there's so many layers to this. And I think trying to just box it in, I think is really limiting to just say that this is the one way to experience shadow, right? It's like tarot. There is a structure to tarot. Yes, we all agree. There are 78 cards. There's a major arcana and minor arcana, but we don't all approach it the same way. And I feel like shadow work is kind of in that same wheelhouse. I feel like people get really up in their feels about the idea of shadow work too and what it means. I remember there was I think it was a few years ago, there was a pretty hot debate going around on TarotTube. I made a video on it where I was like, I'm going to define what it means for me because I don't think it's for me to define it for anybody else. So, but there is that kind of protective, I think, layer. And I wonder if that's a collective shadow in itself, right? That need to protect and to quantify and qualify what shadow work means on a grand level rather than just approaching it in a personal way. So it was interesting to me how the whole dynamic of that happened a few years ago.
I remember that, and I feel as though part of what was driving that, this is just my take on it, but I think part of what was driving that is that we have a habit in our society in general, I'll just say, of taking terms that have a clinical meaning, like a psychologically clinical or a medically clinical meaning, and like throwing them around willy-nilly. I'm just as bad for it as anybody else. I get really like upset when people use the word triggered in a playful way, because that's a word that I have strong feelings about because I have strong experiences about it. So I feel protective over the use of that term. And so when I saw this happening over shadow work, I was like, I feel like there was two schools of thought, not only two, of course, but there was like this dividing line between this is what the term technically means. And the people going, I don't care what it technically means. This is what it means to me, or this is how I work with it. And I think the thing we have to remind ourselves of in those conversations is that both of those viewpoints are completely valid. It's just that we feel protective over the way that we feel the term should be used or should be applied. And that's just human nature, I think, to want to like sort of know the correct usage or the correct way to engage with something. And I think the reason I felt strongly about it when that debate came up is because of what I just told you about how I didn't even encounter the term shadow work as a psychological, like clinical term until long after I was working with it as a spiritual practice. And so for me, it was like, no, this is a thing where you like face this beast, and then you get within and you learn yourself and you face these uncomfortable truths, good or bad or whatever. And like I had all of these ideas wrapped around it based on purely this one conversation I had and years of doing the work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Doing the work in a way that works for you.
Yeah. And I think the thing about shadow work that's really fascinating to me is like, it shouldn't matter at the end of the day, if somebody's able to unpack the things that they normally hide from or avoid and live a better, more fulfilled life because of it, a more authentic life because of it, then I don't give a shit how
you got
figuring out the information. Like just whatever way you access that, like good for you. Like whatever you want to call it, you don't have to even call it shadow work. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people do this exact same work and just have a different name for it or a different type of term to that's the same thing, different type of term to refer to it, you know? So I feel pretty strongly that like when these kinds of debates come up, that it's one of those things where we can get into my way is the right wayisms, and that never helps anybody. So like it's good to remind everybody that we all have a different take of the same experience.
So do you actually set out to do shadow work then? Like as, you know, like I know there are some people that have, they'll use, you know, certain spread or whatever to like actively engage shadow work. Is that something that you do?
Yeah. So actually, this became a core part of my spiritual practice because I was in a situation, again, early to mid 20s when I had encountered this term. I was in a situation where I kind of came face to face with some things about myself that I didn't like and realized that if I was going to live in a functional way, like around other human beings, that I needed to work on that and like challenge myself in that way. And so shadow work became a really important thing to me to do with intentionality. And I would actually argue that or make an argument for the fact that without my deep desire to do a lot of shadow work constantly, like to constantly challenge myself that way, without that, I don't know how strong of a role tarot would have ever had in my life, which sounds really wild to say, but I just feel like it's been so, the two have been so strongly connected for so long that now, I definitely feel like something's missing if I haven't been doing some intentional poking at my shadow on the regular. So yeah, I definitely have defined spreads I'll use, or sometimes it's just that I'm in the mood to do shadow work. And so I'm looking at that reading with an eye to that work. But yeah, I definitely bring intentionality, I would say. What about you?
Mine is completely haphazard and accidental. Like
Perfect. I love that.
I never actually, and I never have set out to do intentional shadow work because the way that I approach it is it happens organically and naturally. But I don't shy away from it when it happens.
That's
so
important.
I think that's maybe the after the fact I have the intentionality. So I will do a spread or whatever. It can be on any topic, on anything. And there will be a card, and it's usually just a card, or maybe it could be the whole overall message, but there will be something that will pop up that I will immediately recognize as what we would consider shadow work, right? I don't use that term for it just because that's never been a huge part of my language, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not doing it, right? Just because I don't doesn't mean I don't do it.
Exactly.
So I never intentionally set out to do shadow work. I don't think I've ever like done a proper shadow work spread or anything because I swear to God, it pops up in almost every reading I do. So I feel like I'm constantly working on it. Something will pop up and I'll feel some shadow around it, have some resistance to it. And then I know, okay, there's something there that I need to work on. And so it kind of just happens when it happens. And I will dive deeper into it at that time.
Yeah. So like if a card comes up and you're like, this is poking a shadow, you
Yeah.
might pull more cards or do more journal work on that particular thing to sort of extricate the lesson from it or the message
Yeah.
from it that you need. Yeah.
I think
That makes a lot of sense.
It's important, I think, not to go, oh, that shadow, and then just shove it aside and keep going with your reading, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you keep going with your reading, but then like never come back to it, right?
Right.
But I think it's also important that there is a time and a place for me personally, and I can't always do it when it happens. So sometimes
Yeah.
I do need to set it aside for a little while,
Until
be
you're
it
ready.
a few hours, a few days, whatever it is. This is why having a tarot journal is so important to me, because that's all in there. I have notes and, all kinds of stuff that when I need to come back to something, then it's there and I can come back to it and I can keep working through it, because I'm not always in the space when the shadow pops up and says, hello, take a look at me. I'm not always in a space to pay attention to it.
Yes.
Sometimes I just have to note it and move on for a moment or the time being and then come back to it. Because honestly, if I ignore it, it just keeps coming back anyway.
Yeah.
It just keeps popping
Yeah.
back up.
It will
I'll
haunt you for
mess it.
sure. Like,
Yeah. It will
I think
definitely haunt you.
I think you raised a really interesting point, and I have two things I want to like make sure we do. I want to really stop and define what we consider to be shadow work. But before we do that, I guess I want to respond to the piece you said about having be doing things at the right time, because I think there can be this like flippant, and this just to speak to the earlier debates. I think sometimes we can be a little flippant about talking about shadow work, like it's easy and anybody can do it and like no big deal and like whatever, everybody should be doing shadow work. It's not that simple. And you pointed out something that I think really doesn't get said enough, which is that there is a time and a place. And like there's stuff that can come through the shadow that is wildly difficult to navigate and that needs either outside support, or you need to be in a really strong, resilient headspace or state of mind or emotional state to be able to navigate. I've had everything from straight up repressed memories, which some might say is not shadow, is something much different, but I've had that kind of thing. And there's some stuff that like definitely needs to be navigated. All of it should be navigated on your terms. That's kind of the point. Like you need to be in a place where you feel like you can move through it in a healthy, safe way. And I think that we don't always say that enough. That it's not just like throw cards and now you're going to have this really deep thing. And if you're going to do it in the way that you described, where kind of like organically you allow that stuff to come through, then yeah, if it comes through, you have to be prepared to pause it if you need to and then come back to it when you can.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when you say that about the way that it comes up for you organically, I do that, but I do a lot of also like very intentional. A lot of my shadow work is around, actually, let's pause. Let me not derail myself too much. Before I get too deep into the weeds, I guess, of what that looks like for me, I guess we should pause first and say, we've defined kind of what the shadow is, but how do you define, I know that for you, it's kind of loose and organic, but like when we're saying shadow work, what are we really saying? How would you define what we're saying when we're saying that?
So for me, when I say shadow work, if I'm using that term, what I'm most often referring to is something that pops up that is unacknowledged for me. It could be positive, it could be negative, but it's something that I have not brought into my conscious awareness. So it pops up and says, hello. And now I'm like, okay,
I guess I got to deal with this now.
Let's deal with this, right?
Yeah.
It's like the unexpected dinner guest that shows up at your door and demands a meal. And you're like, all right.
Okay.
So, and depending on how much time you have, you might run through McDonald's and be like, here's your freaking meal. Or you might make them this full, beautiful, 6-course meal. I have no idea how to cook. So this is a terrible analogy for me.
It seems like a lot of courses. Oh, I'm going to sneeze.
Yeah, right?
Am I going to sneeze now? I thought it was coming.
Nope.
Nope. It's going to sneak up on me. Just wait. It'll be great. It'll be the perfect moment.
It'll be like the unexpected dinner guest. It's your shadow.
My sneeze will be our unexpected guest. Yes, absolutely. I like that analogy a lot. And then when you say deal with it, what do you do?
What does that look like for me?
Yeah. What is it?
It does kind of depend on what it is. There's what I feel would be internal and external shadows, because I think we can have that around other people, other things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That we don't necessarily have full control over. You always have control over how you respond to a situation. You do not have control over how somebody else responds.
Okay.
So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So I guess if I'm looking at whether it's an external shadow work where it's dealing with something else, somebody else that is outside of my physical self, then I would probably lean more towards external work with it in terms of, maybe doing some readings, but like, honestly, if it's external, I'm probably going to need some more feedback other than my own. When
Another
it's
perspective.
another
Yeah.
perspective, because
Yeah.
usually if you're having conflict outside of yourself, there's something rubbing up against that. So it helps to have somebody else's perspective.
Yeah.
If it's internal, then that's when I go to, like, I will dig deeper with cards. I will journal. I journal a lot when I run up against shadow because I have to figure out what I feel about it all.
Yeah.
I will read books if it's around a particular topic or issue. I will read books. I will watch videos. I will do, like, take in, that's still, I guess, taking in some external influences, but it's not like on a personal level.
Yeah, like it's a more self-reflective
It's
exercise.
more self-reflective because I'm taking those people's words and then internalizing all of that. Whereas if I externalize, I go to somebody for advice, I'm getting their perspective. I want to keep it separate from myself.
Yes.
So I think it's a big difference between external and internal, but and I would feel like, I don't want to speak for other people, but I feel like most of what we see in terms of what's geared towards shadow work is more internal.
I would agree. Yeah.
So I think that's more the thing.
Yeah, and I like that you talked about the internal and the external, because for me, one thing I find important for my own, how I would define shadow work is that oftentimes my shadow work is identified by either my own like bad behavior, like things I know I'm doing that are not healthy, or that I'm not communicating well, or I'm not being my highest self. And in those moments, I use shadow work to sort of call those things out in myself and then dig into that and do the work. And by do the work, a lot of the same things you described, actually, a lot of journaling, a lot of pulling cards. I like doing the journal work around concentrated topics. So once I identify what the thing is that I'm avoiding dealing with or avoiding looking at, whatever it is, then I want to dig into very specific, targeted, either like you said, journaling or reading. So a good example of this might be attachment style. So maybe I notice things about my attachment style that are interfering in my relationship. There's an external factor there, but there's something within me that's not functioning the way that I want it to function. And so I kind of like dissect myself in a way and go, okay, what's the piece that I feel like I can make a difference in? And then I'll dig into that. So I might read a book about attachment and start working on that stuff. Or I went down a rabbit hole not long ago with Enneagrams, like anything that can help me understand this myself or the way that I operate. Could be astrology, could be any of those things. Anything that gives me a language, and maybe this is coming back to the way that I look at things in almost this like sciencey way sometimes, where I want to deconstruct it and then find the piece that's not functioning and give it what it needs. Does it need more oil? Does it, you know what I mean? I went right to mechanical, but hopefully you understand what I mean.
I get it.
Yeah. So it's almost like it's like troubleshooting myself. That's how I would say is the simplest way to describe shadow work for me. Most of the time I'm troubleshooting myself. Either I'm reacting to things, and I have a lot of reasons why I need to do that regularly. I have a lot of triggers. I have a lot of trauma I'm constantly navigating around. And those things require, I feel like, a higher level of awareness, because when I wasn't doing any of this, I was just basically repeating negative, toxic patterns that I'd learned throughout my life. And I didn't want to be that person. And so it's like, I got to do things differently and better. And so for me, shadow work's like, I would go as far as to say it's very much a core value, but it looks so many different ways. And I think that's a piece where people are like, what is shadow work? Like, how do you do it? And I think if I were to answer that question, I'm going to ask you too, so think about it for a second. But like, I feel like if I was to answer that question as succinctly as possible, I would say it's number one, identification. And then number two, like doing something after you identify it, like deciding if or what you want to change and if or how you want to challenge yourself. Those would be the two things I would do after I identify something. So that's the, what is it? How do you do it kind of thing in a nutshell. And you can employ any number of tools to then do that. Does that make sense?
I totally agree with that, because I think that's one of the things that makes it a difficult thing to talk about, because we're always trying to provide these, like, you could do this, you could use that deck, you could try this technique or whatever. Yeah. And I like that you broke it down into just those base parts, because I think that's what we need to remember when we're like giving advice or talking about this subject, is that how we approach it is going to be very different for each of us based on how we just are in the world, what our, what our own personal upbringings are, traditions are, triggers are, whatever. Like
Yeah.
that, I think that's such a personal thing that it would be hard for me, because I do get this question from time to time. How do you do shadow work? Well,
Yes.
how I do shadow work is this, but I can't tell you how you should do shadow work. But
Yeah.
so I like that you broke it down into those, like, identify what the issue is or where the
Mhm.
shadow is or what it is, and then what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
I think that's great, because regardless of what you do about it, acknowledging it, like a lot of things that we do is a big part of it. And I know intention is a word that I think we have used in every single practice video we've made.
But it matters so
It's
much. It's a
so
huge
important.
piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's like one of those things where what you do about it, I can tend to frame shadow work by accident because mine looks a lot like this. I can frame it a lot like I'm trying to improve something about myself or stop doing something that I view as unhealthy or damaging in my relationships or whatever. I tend to do a lot of that kind of work because of all the shit that I went through growing up.
Mhm.
But there's another piece there that needs to be talked about too with the shadow, whereas so many of the time, so much of the time,
Mhm.
we are trying to one of the things we're trying to do is identify there's something about us that we've rejected that's good or that is positive.
Mhm.
And so what do we do about that? Sometimes we need to pull that out and give it like love and acceptance.
Mhm.
Sometimes we need to give compassion to ourselves. Sometimes it's about self-forgiveness. It's
Mhm.
not always about finding what is perceived as damaged or broken and fixing it. A lot of time, which is
Yeah.
terrible language, by the way, I apologize for that. But like, it's
Yeah.
not always that. A lot of times it's actually pulling it out and giving it space to be allowed. A good
Mhm.
example of what I mean by that would be, and I've really done a lot of this work through YouTube, believe it or not, I was going to say, but everyone's going to believe it, where I take my inner child self, the playful side of myself, the side that doesn't worry if other people are going to think I'm goofy because I love unicorns or whatever, and I let my freak flag fly on YouTube. That was really an active practice of shadow work because
Mhm.
that was a piece of myself that I had rejected for so long or was ashamed of for so long. So I had to pull it out and be like, you know what? It's going to be okay here. Here
Mhm.
it's going to be okay. And it was very healing to do that and to just let that be a part of what I was doing here. So sometimes it's not about necessarily having to even deeply understand it or even improve it. Sometimes it's like just loving it or
Just
just accepting
accepting
it.
it.
Yeah.
That's so fantastic that you mentioned that, because I think we fall into this trap of shadow work is something that needs to be fixed, right?
Yes.
We have to
Yes.
fix it.
Yeah.
It's not always something that needs to be fixed. Sometimes it's just something, and that's why I like using the language of like it's what needs to be integrated, what needs to be acknowledged, because it's not necessarily always something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
Like you said, maybe it needs to be understood, maybe it needs to be loved, maybe it needs to be, just
Embrace.
accepted. Yes, accepted for what it is. And
Yes.
I think that so often we get locked into this sort of thinking and language around that it's like it's a broken thing, we must fix it. That's probably, thinking back now, back to my witchy days, that's probably why I kind of reject, in a sense, like that's a terrible harsh word, but I don't use the language of shadow work, because the sort of influence and training that I had back in that day was through that lens of it's
Yeah.
broken. It's,
Yeah.
it's something that you must be fixed. And then I kind of discovered over time that that's not true for me. Sometimes it is just things that just need to be accepted or acknowledged in some way, shape, or form. And so I think that's why I kind of stopped using that particular word, because it was so negatively framed in
Yeah.
all the experiences that I had previous with it, that I just kind of like went, okay, well, fine, that's your version of shadow work, but I'm going to be over here and I'm going to do this, and I'm just going to call it something different. But I do shadow work in that way, like all the time. These days,
Yeah.
like half of my readings are about, how do I get past my own creative blocks? How do I get past my fear of success, which sounds like the most ridiculous thing to say out
I have
loud.
it too. I
But
have it
that's a
too.
shadow thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily something that's broken. It just
Mm.
needs to be acknowledged. I need to integrate that into my way of being in the world if I'm going to continue on this path that I'm on. And a
Yeah.
lot of my readings are around that kind of stuff, because I'll come up across something or something will happen and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to pull some cards around this. And in my brain, I'm not using the language shadow work, but it could very easily be called that. because I bumped up against something that now made me uncomfortable or made me aware of something that I wasn't aware of before. And so now I'm going to have to do some work around that. And it
and I like that you say unacknowledged and unacknowledged or unseen, or even rejected qualities of yourself or qualities in your life or whatever aspects that you're bumping up against. And like that reminder that it's not bad stuff. And I think we miss opportunities to do that deeper work when we're only looking for the negative things. If we're only looking for those bad qualities, what happens when these good things bump up and we're like, yeah, that makes me uncomfortable, but it's good, so I don't have to worry about it. Like I can just like whatever, I can ignore it. It's fine. You know, and not make it important in our lives. But I think that all of it matters and all of it's important. And it's like, this is the very process of self-validation, of like learning how to be the 6 of Wands for ourselves. Like learning how to give us that right to be and exist in the world exactly as we are, not who we're trying to perform or be. And I think there's a lot around shadow work too that's just generally about unmasking. And when we think of it in that way, when we think, okay, how can I move through the world and take off more masks other than the ones we have to wear to function, you know? But how can I move through the world and take off more masks? It's like, oh, it's not that complicated. It's just, how can I get deeper and truer to myself? Like truly. That's what like most of it seems to be. And it's interesting because like I like that we're coming at it from different angles, because that is the thing where sometimes it's this very intentional thing. It's very rare that I sit down and go, I'm going to do some shadow work today, but it is very often where I pull out cards and I'm looking for those pieces. I like the way that tarot can point at the things I didn't figure out all on my own. Because if it wasn't doing that for me, I wouldn't be pulling cards. Like, what's the point? So in a way, it all feels like that. If I'm reading for myself, I should say. Unless I'm reading, I guess, on a specific topic. Like, I guess if I'm asking, like, should I or shouldn't I, or that kind of thing, it's not quite as open. But I think most of it is organic, really.
Yeah.
I think it's a natural, whether we name it or not, I think it's a natural part of the process of just any sort of self-evaluation. So regardless of what tool you're using, right? Tarot is a tool. It's a tool we all use, and primarily, as for the majority of us, as sort of a self-growth tool, a self-healing tool, self-transformation tool for ourselves or others. And you can use journaling's a tool in that way too. You can use any sort of tool for that. But I think popping up against those sort of things is just a natural part of becoming a better you, because you can't really become a better you until you do acknowledge those parts of you that you know, put whatever descriptor you want on it. For me personally, it's all of them, man. I got stuff that is repressed. I've got stuff that is, you know, unacknowledged. I've got stuff that's like, I don't like about myself, right? I can hit all of those notes. So what comes up is just, it's what flavor of that am I getting today? But I think it does come up. Like, I'm trying to think of if there's ever a tarot reading that I've ever really done where I didn't feel like there's some piece or part of that I could name as shadow. Like, I feel like,
I mean, to me, that's the whole nature of, like, unless you're doing readings entirely, and some people do. So, and there's no judgment if this is how you work with tarot. Some people read tarot primarily about how to interrelate with others. So they might do a lot of tarot around, what is this person? How is this person impacting me? How do I relate to this person? I find it's less than that as it is. But even then, if you're doing a relationship, like even if you're doing a simple 3-card me, them, us spread, there's still the element of the shadow within that. Like, what about me relating to this person is pulling out something that, you know what I mean? So it's still there. But yeah, it's hard to imagine a tarot reading that doesn't have a little aspect of that. But I do find that whenever I have been activated in some way, so whether that's a full-on trigger or just an uncomfortable experience, or I've maybe had to, even in a positive way, put myself out in a way that feels a little bit scary, like take a risk or be vulnerable with somebody new, or, oh shoot, what if I overshared with this person? A regular thing that happens in my brain. you know, there's all these kinds of things. Then I might go to the cards and go, like, what do I need to know about myself in this moment? Like, what is at play here? What is contributing to me feeling so intense, even though everything seems fine right now? So for me, it's a tool that helps me also sort of unpack when I can't see myself clearly, when I'm having trouble understanding. Maybe it's like a normal day, but I'm like really testy or cranky and I want to know why, or I'm really hyper and I want to know why. And that's where I feel like cards can be a mirror and can help us to sort of pick out those things, or at least give our brain something to key into to help us figure that out about ourselves.
Start the language.
Yeah, kind of. It gives us a language for it.
It's so interesting too, is we keep saying tarot, and I think there's an important, I think, note somewhere in this discussion, I don't know where it is, but about Oracle, because
because most of mine are Oracle.
Mine are not. Most of mine are tarot.
Really?
But I'm looking at, like, just off to the side, I'm looking at my row of Oracle decks on my shelf.
Yeah.
And the majority of those, I would say, do not have shadow in them. They are fully focused on, like, the affirmations, the lighter side of things. Yes, helping you to, like, embrace the more positive, I guess. And I don't mean that in, like, a bad negative way. Like, I think there's definitely a time and place for that. But I think it's interesting that the discussion really does tend to revolve around tarot, because I think, for me personally, it's inherent in every single tarot card. There's light and shadow, and then kind of the neutral in every single tarot card. So the whole thing is all.
It's a balanced tarot. I think the reason tarot becomes that majority in the conversation is because, yeah, exactly what you said, the tarot has a built-in balance to it. Whether or not you read reversals, most of us who don't read upside down cards still read the light and shadow in every card, depending on context and what's going on and what's coming through. And so we have that inherent balance. Whereas with Oracle decks, there can be no structure. There can be a structure. The structure may have nothing to do with any of those more challenging qualities. And as you were talking, all I kept thinking was, like, this is why I find myself gravitating toward very few affirmation style decks. In fact, one of my key qualities of a good Oracle is if there's balance, if there's some challenging cards as well as some upbeat, because I really struggle whenever I have a deck, and I do have a couple that are my, like, cozy blanket, make me feel better when it's a rough day kind of decks. And they're for that purpose, but I don't need very many of those, because when I go to cards, 9 times out of 10, I want to have both on the table. Like, I want both that, like, light and shadow in equal measure. And I want to feel the challenge or the lift or whatever I need in that moment, because I'm trusting the process of working with the cards to bring forward what I need in that moment.
I think we talked about this in our deck collection video too, but we are starting to see more Oracle that's bringing in the shadow, that's bringing in that balanced energy. I don't have very many in my collection. Like, there's more out there than I have, but if I had to compare my Oracles, the positive, more affirmative Oracles would way outweigh even if I put the ones that are specifically for shadow and the ones that are just balanced, even if I put those together in one category, I still feel like the other side would be, like, way bigger.
That's really interesting, because I think I'm exactly the opposite. I think I'm literally trying to imagine in my head, and there's a couple decks that are specifically affirmative that I literally don't even put, like, on my Oracle rack with the rest of my regular Oracles. I literally put it in a different spot for when I want an affirmation style reading for a client or myself. And the rest of the time, I'm trying to think if I think maybe hanging on my rack, there's 2 that I can think of right now that lean specifically positive. Well, maybe a few more, maybe more than 2, but definitely I'm far outweighed by balance, because I find that I tend to move on Oracle decks that don't have balance or lean more dark even, which is a weird thing to say, but I think it's not really when I think about my practice. Like, even when it came down to inner child tarot decks, I found that the ones that I gravitated towards using showed those more difficult emotions, even in those fluffier decks. Like, because if it's too fluffy, I stop being able to relate to it. Like, it needs to show, I need that so much for my card practice that when it's missing, I really notice it, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's so fascinating.
Do you ever get in where you're doing a reading and, it's dipping into that shadow, it's really heavy. Do you ever pull in anything specifically softer to balance that energy out?
Oh yeah. Like, I would say right now, my go-to for that would be, I call it my, like, Linus blanket deck now, but it's the deck by Kimberly Sand called the Align Heart Affirmation Oracle. that deck has been living on my reading table since I got it. And the timing of getting it was really trippy because I was having a really difficult time at the time. And it literally, I carried it with me everywhere. It got me through really tough times. And so now, if I'm really feeling the ouch in a reading, I will pull a card from that 9 times out of 10. Unless the thing that's making me feel ouchy is something I know I need to dig deep into. Like, you know how you have to sometimes pick at the scab to kind of, it's a gross analogy. Like, you know, if I'm feeling the need to do that, then I'll grab the opposite. I'll actually grab something intentionally challenging, like the reclaim, and I'll dig in. But if I'm like feeling like, okay, this is a lot, like I'm kind of emotionally hyperventilating right now, then I'm going to grab the align, or I'm going to grab the surrender, or I'm trying to think what else. Those are the 2 main ones I can think of, is align and surrender.
I think that goes back to the whole, like, you got to be ready for it, but sometimes it just hits the table and you're not ready for it. So there's been times where I've done that, where I'm like, wow, this is a lot. Like, I'm not trying to negate the reading.
No, but you want to hold your hand through it, like support yourself.
Yeah, it's a hand holding. And it's also, there's been times where I've pulled a more affirmative oracle at the end of a reading. I don't do it very often, but at the end of the reading, because I don't want to walk away in a bad headspace.
Yes,
so exactly. I will intentionally, like, it doesn't mean I'm not going to keep working on that issue, but I also, like, I have to be able to walk away from the table and still live my life. Right.
Yeah.
Like, let's be real, not take it out on my husband or you know, my kids or whatever, you know? So I think that's really important too, when we're talking about this, like, really deep kind of like pokey kind of work. Like, I think it's important to be mindful of that too. Like, I feel like you can't just, at least for me personally, I can't walk around in that all the time.
No.
Like, it's got to have time and a place. And I love doing transition readings. I do transition readings for all kinds of things where I'm like, I'm going from one space to another. So I need to like switch my energy around, and I use my decks for that. But I find if I'm in that space where I'm in that pokey reading space, I will grab a super fluffy, super comforting oracle deck to just like, okay, like, that's great. I'm going to keep working on that, but I don't want to carry it with me all day long. So let's shift the energy around. It's like the same as I have to watch, if Kevin and I watch something even remotely scary before bed, I have to watch something else, or I will have nightmares.
This cracks me up because this is why my favorite show to watch if I'm drifting off to sleep is like My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Like, because I need something. It's also why I can't read. I do most of my reading, like book reading, like at night, like in bed. I can't read scary, dark shit when I'm trying to go to sleep. Like, I have to read something fluffy. So like, watch something fluffy or read something fluffy. It's exactly the same. And I think what you said about doing transition readings, I don't want to gloss over that because I think that's really powerful. I think the idea of using a card pull from any deck that feels like it can help you do this to transition from one state to another state is really beneficial. Brings a level of mindfulness to how you're engaging with your life. So you're not just like, what's the word? Leaking your energy all over other people when you're doing this dark, heavy stuff. And like, I think that's why, one of the reasons why I'm such a fan of that Align deck, and I know I'm kind of like harping on it, but is because it acknowledges things like you are good enough as you are. I'm trying to think of good examples, but it's got clear acknowledgement of the challenge while making sure you know that you can handle it. Like, it's that kind of a vibe. It's I really struggle with decks that have a tone that implies that you should just kind of smile and forget about it. You know what I mean? I don't know how to describe it, but there are decks that have that tone where it's almost like that pretend nothing bad is happening kind of energy. Cannot handle that. But I do want that like comfort that like you can do this, you're going to be okay, like you are loved, like you are safe. That kind of stuff is incredibly valuable when you're feeling like energetically activated in a dark way or a heavy way. And so that idea to do a transition reading, just moving from one state of your day to another or one energy to another, I think is really good advice and like a really good tool to engage with.
I use it all the time. I started doing that when I started working from home because I had to work and live and be a mom and do all the things in the same space.
Yeah.
So I started doing transition readings to help myself shift out of work brain into home brain. And now I do it for all kinds of things. If I'm going from recording a video to writing something, I'll pull, it doesn't always have to be big pulls. I'll pull a card or whatever. Sometimes I'll do 2 or 3, whatever it is I feel like, but it just helps me to shift out of that space. And I think it's even more important when I'm doing things that are maybe putting me in this sort of uncomfortable state, because I don't want to walk around in that in the rest of the day, right? Like I gotta be here for other people too.
Yeah, gotta function.
It was interesting when you were talking about, just to circle back, kind of side tangent, but circle back, the 2 different kinds of like messaging on the Oracle decks. I feel like like you're talking about the aligned one is like when a friend tells you it's going to be okay versus the stranger standing in the grocery store line.
Yeah, like somebody telling you smile.
Yeah.
Like, fuck you.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, that's how I feel. But yeah, when somebody acknowledges that things are difficult, but you can still be okay, that hits in a more authentic, real way.
Yeah, it's different. It's totally different. It's the difference between a stranger and a friend telling you. And
100%.
There's like there's that level of like distance in some of those Oracle decks. I usually rehome those ones too. Because I feel like it's like a greeting card. I don't need that.
It's like the elevator, like it's like that the small talk of decks. I can't do small talk. I can't do it in my life. I can't do it for my decks. There needs to be a level of real or acknowledgement even in the affirmation. Like, I think that's why some self-care decks annoy me too. It's hard to find one that really hits right, because same thing. It's like, treat yourself, get a mani-pedi, like take a bubble bath. I love that stuff. That's fine. But like, what about like, don't forget to shower today, like get enough sleep, like basic functioning things, or, hey, like fall apart a little. It's okay to like be a mess,
Those are my favorite ones. The ones that validate that life is freaking messy. Like those are my favorite ones.
Same. Yeah, absolutely same. So yeah, it's kind of neat to talk about the different ways that our cards can engage with us. It's funny because when we're thinking about like the unacknowledged and the unseen, again, this is like the beauty of divination. This is the power of present tense divination, because I think we talk about it as though it's like psychospiritual, which I think is technically true. But when we're talking about not future casting or not intentionally future casting and just really reading the cards for what we need in that moment or what's the energy of the day, there's always this opportunity to find or discover something about the energy of whatever's happening or whatever situation you're in or whatever people you're dealing with yourself that can help you identify that stuff, help you identify the unseen, the unacknowledged, the repressed, the whatever, the rejected. And that's a powerful thing about divination that we don't always give enough, like, I want to say, like, instead of street credit, I want to say like woo credit. Like, we don't give present readings enough credit for being able to take us to some really cool places that I don't think we'd be able to go if we weren't bringing that intention for uncovering those things into our practices. So I just think it's really powerful to be able to define our practice and get power and potency out of it, like whatever type of reading we're trying to do. But yeah, I want to kind of, again, circle back, I guess I'll say, to something you said in the very beginning, which is that I think for a lot of us, we're already doing shadow work. We just haven't stopped to name it. We haven't stopped to define it, but we are looking for those unseen elements when we pull our cards. I think it's rare that maybe somebody isn't doing that on some level, whether they intend to or not.
It's not to say that we do it every single time, but like we said, sometimes we pull like light fluffy affirmation decks because we don't want to poke at anything at all. Like, I'm not in the space for that. But yeah, I think it happens. I think it just happens.
Yeah, I think so too. So it's a good answer for if somebody's like, what is shadow work and how do I do it? It's like, hey, you're probably already doing it. But it's really just the essence of self-reflection. Really, it's a type of self-reflection. It's funny because when you just said that about how we pull oracle decks or we'll pull affirmation decks when we need it or whatever, it reminded me of what I used to say as a yoga teacher when I was teaching students, and they'd say, like, how do I know that I'm an advanced student? Like, what's the trigger? Like, how will I know that I'm advanced versus like a beginner or intermediate or whatever? And the funny thing is that we often think it's like something really grandiose. Like, it's when you can do this particular headstand, or it's when you can do this arm balance or whatever. And my answer is always the same. It's like, you know, you're advanced when you know yourself well enough to know when to push yourself and when to back off, when you know exactly where your sweet spot is to get challenged and to have ease and to be able to breathe and to like move in a way that's fluid, but that gets you what you need in that moment. And like, that is exactly the same thing with divination. Like, you are an advanced practitioner.
Analogy.
Yeah, with shadow work and all this stuff, it's like you are advanced when you know when to push yourself and when to give yourself comfort, like when to dig deeper and when to go, you know what, not today. That's what makes you advanced. And I think that's something we don't really stop to define that very often. Like that it's not about this, like your practice has to look away. It's like, how do you feel? And do you know yourself well enough to like know how to engage?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's such a great analogy for that, because it is really, and that is, I think, for a lot of us, like what we're doing with tarot in general, like, right, trying to know ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, I love it.
Should we talk about decks?
Yes, please. I'm like, when do we get to talk about decks?
You know everybody's gonna ask.
So we each pulled a few of our favorites for however we do shadow work.
You want to start with the two that we both have?
Yes, let's do those first. So I have both of those, right?
Yes, you do. I didn't pull mine out, so.
So the first one is a mass market one, and it is the Lantern Oracle. So this is actually new in my collection, new-ish. I thought this was just like another fluffy deck. I had no idea. And then I bought it, and I was like, oh, but it's got cards like this one literally is enough. You were born enough. It's got really strong messages around. Yeah, this has got the key to intimacy. Oops, key to intimacy. Melting. This is exactly what I was just talking about. Melting mask.
That's awesome.
Yep. Moving forward. So there's really good cards in here. Perspective. This is a great one for challenging yourself, but it also doesn't feel super pokey. Like it's just a little pokey, but it's many of the cards are just a little pokey. You know what I mean? There's a little bit. I love this one. I love Repair. This is so
yeah, that one's such a good one. That's like the one Oracle deck besides the next one that you're going to show that I would say is like, if somebody asked me what shadow work Oracle you have, that would probably be the one that I'd name, and the next one that you're going to show, because it's
so this is don't sleep on this one. This is such a good deck. Love that. And it flew totally under my radar. The other one, if I had to pick like one to recommend, like my favorite shadow work deck to recommend, it would be this one. And it is the Wisdom of the Shadow. This one, I really like using this in tandem with the Wisdom of the
Divine Feminine.
I was like, what is the name of it? Because they live together in the same bag. And I'm like, but I like to pull one of each. I like to pull something from the shadow and then Wisdom of the Divine Feminine next to it. And it's like the Wisdom of the Divine Feminine is like how to engage with whatever you've uncovered with this deck. And it works so powerfully. I think I like this because there's something about the messy quality of the art that, first of all, is not my style. If I was to say this is like not my aesthetic, you know, but there's something about that quality, that sort of loose kind of visceral quality that really just pokes and like gets right in there. Anyway, you tell me what you think about this one, because I'm just babbling.
Oh, I love it. I use it pretty much in tandem, like you said, with the Divine Feminine. I've been using it. I did a video when I did the Red Threads Tarot video. I have been using the red threads with that deck and the Divine Feminine one all together.
Yeah.
And it's been amazing. And I use that for the what's unseen. What's unknown to me right now? What do I need to bring into the light? There's just something about that artwork that I feel like is super empowering, even though that's what I'm trying to say. If I could get my words out. It's empowering, even though it has set of words on it. Negative words, right?
Totally.
Words considered negative.
There's a ferocity and a wildness to it that I think asks you to tap into your power with every image. And so, yeah, I totally get what you mean by that. This is such an incredibly powerful deck, and I recommend it constantly, but it's really, really good. And I mean, it's one of those things where I've never had it without its sister deck, the Wisdom of the Divine Feminine, but when you put them together, and I did this in my video on this, and I just go check it out if you want to know what I mean, but like literally, like I had so many incredible pairs come up as I was flipping through them and just seeing how they work together. And it's just the most potent thing ever. I love this deck so much. So that one, these two, we were getting ready to start filming, and Dawn's like, did you bring these two? And I'm like, yeah. Just like, oh, okay, good.
Okay, I'll stick with Oracle then. So this one is this one's new to my collection. This is the Death Doula. Here's the
Okay,
back.
I don't understand this deck at all.
Yeah, I'm gonna hold them up one at a time because if I try to
Yeah, they'll
do it
fall.
other ways, they'll fall. So I don't really know. I'm gonna be honest. I haven't really read through the whole guidebook. So
Okay.
I've been working with this deck completely intuitively. And I don't know that it's necessarily like meant to be a shadow deck or anything, but there is something about the imagery that like it pokes. Every card pokes, whether it's meant to or not. Like
Yeah.
this one's like solitude. So it's somebody did explain to me the art because I was trying to figure out, it's clearly it's photographs, but it's also oh my goodness, I'm not a photographer. What did they say? It's not digitally done. It's like done in the production where you do double negative. Is that what it's called?
I don't know. Is this so they're literally like maybe where they're doing the actual chemicals with the
It's either a chemical process in the creation of in the production of the video of the photos, or it's something that happens with the camera. I wasn't entirely clear.
Huh.
But the fact that this is not digitally edited, I think is what makes it so pokey for me. It's super raw. It's real. Like, and some of the keywords like dishonesty.
Yeah.
These come up and it's got like, I'm trying to find some like growth.
So many people rave about this deck and I like want to get it, but it's so abstract.
Like this one's
is a good one.
Abyssal Plane. I mean, sometimes like the guidebook's good too, but like I just find that I don't really need to get into the guidebook too much.
Yeah, it looks like it. I really love the keywords. In fact, I almost bought it because I love the keywords.
It was the keywords that like, because at first I was like, I don't, some of these, like this one, this embodiment one, that is so pokey. Like pokey in a good way, but super pokey. Because you can't quite see what's going on. And to me, that is a thing that when I come across a deck, I also love this one, Techno Cleanse, because man,
I don't think I saw that one before.
We all need a Techno Cleanse from now on. Then.
Techno Cleanse, yes.
The thing is that when I come across decks that sometimes have artwork that I can't quite make out what the heck is going on in the card, that for me kind of pokes at shadow stuff. I don't know why. And I think it's because my brain is like, oh, we can't categorize that. We don't know what that is.
Oh, interesting.
So like, and I'll show just a tarot deck really quickly.
I was just going to say, because I almost asked you about a tarot deck and then I'm like, I wonder if you have it.
Well, I have this one too.
Oh boy.
We're definitely going to talk about. But in terms of the not being able to tell what's going on, this Dark Angel Tarot, I would also consider a shadow deck because of that sense of it's kind of blurry and I can't always tell what's going on. And when
it stresses me out, I swear, like it's like what you're getting out of this. I'm like, this gives me like almost anxiety because I'm like, if I don't understand what's going on, I'm just annoyed. I cannot like dig
It's
deeper.
not every card in this deck. And actually the funny thing, I just talked about this deck in a video coming up, but or maybe it'll be out by the time this is out. This is my what did I call it? Like my 90s goth girl tarot.
Yeah.
But there's so much about this deck. There's so much about the 90s that was shadowy pokey. So I think there's a thing there with that. But there is that whole layer of, I don't quite know what I'm looking at here.
Yeah.
But when I try to focus in on it, there's where I find shadow because my brain is like, ooh, we have to figure that out now.
Yeah, there's like a squishy quality to the artwork. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's like smushy. It's smushy. Maybe smushy is better than squishy, but like it's kind of like the edges are blunt, like
it's
mushing up.
Like it's blurred.
Yeah,
it's not, and that's the thing because I've looked at it like really, really closely. It's not actually blurry.
No,
like
it's
the whole art style is that way, and so it's really interesting. Sometimes it's like a particular style like that, or when things get like blotchy. Blotchy for me is a shadow thing. Like I for whatever reason, I haven't entirely like nailed down what that is, but that's
interesting.
There's like a deck out there that has like, it's just blobs of color.
Yeah. Oh, are you thinking about the tarot? Is it literally called the Tarot of Color?
It might be called the Tarot of Color. Like, no. Nothing against that deck, but it's stuff like that where I'm like, I do know there's intentionality into that. I'm not discounting the deck in any way, shape, or form. But I look at that and I go, no.
What is that one that's really abstract that had the regular borders, then it had the red borders, the wine colored borders?
The Margaret Peterson?
Margaret Peterson. That's what I was going to ask you.
That one I'm totally fine with.
Anyway, but yeah, I was going to ask you about the Margaret Peterson specifically because I was like, that one has got that abstract quality to it.
Abstract doesn't bother me. I think it's like the same thing with that I have with the really squiggly decks, right? I talked about it in a video. It was like the Oracle. It was like a portal Oracle. I talked about it in one of my reflections because it was gifted to me and I got it and I was like, oh, no.
Cannot do it, huh?
There's a thing there. Like, I just can't with that zigzaggedy. I don't even know
I want to know what you mean by zigzaggedy. Do you have an example deck you can tell us?
Oh, this is I'm not dissing any of these decks. Let's just
no.
The Oracle of the Mermaid one, the newer one. That's the other one that I can think of that has that. It's like a Monet. So when you get it up when you get up close with it, it's like little splotches, then ziggly lines that make up the artwork that just gives me if you pull back and you look at it from a distance. So like seeing it on camera is fine. So
like pointillism and stuff like that. Does that bug you?
No, because that's,
oh my gosh, I cannot.
Because that's very ordered. Right?
Right.
So it's the chaos
of it. Okay.
It's probably the same reason why I do not like super busy collage decks. I love collage, but if there's too much going on the card, there's too many things, I get like super anxious and I'm like, nope. I like minimalist collage.
So Voyager's not for you, is what I'm hearing.
I have Voyager, but yeah, it's not really my cup of tea. I have it because it's Voyager and
Yeah, that makes sense. So
let's just go down the road of all the things that creep me out.
I mean, I was here for that conversation for real. I just want to know. So I've only got two others to talk about. So the first one, I'll say this is my quintessential. This is emotional baggage. I love this so much. This little thing.
I knew exactly what it was the second I saw the bag.
Yeah, this is the Reclaim. The thing about this is definitely never a deck I can just willy-nilly pull out. This is one that's really good if you're not sure what you're feeling or why you're feeling it. And that happens to me like a lot, like more than I care to admit, where like I'm off and I don't know what's going on. And like, this is good because it just acknowledges just different feelings, right? Mm-hmm. So if you need to be seen in something, I think it's really good for, as far as random draws, I use it for that a lot. If I'm just trying to understand something, like let's say, I don't know, like I'm sensing tension in a relationship or I'm sensing something going on. This is a great one for like identification. So we're talking about shadow work being identifying and then unpacking or like knowing what to do with that information. This is great for the identification step. I feel like it doesn't really tell you necessarily what to do with it. It just helps you acknowledge.
I was just going to ask you that. So would you, when you work with that one, because I don't have that deck, I've looked at it many times, but do you pull something with it then to get into the message?
Yeah, I rarely use this by myself unless I'm literally like, if I'm having like sort of an emotional meltdown, which sounds really dramatic, but if I'm like really feeling like overwhelmed, yeah, then I will pull a card just to be like, what is freaking going on? Mm-hmm. And sometimes just naming it is all I need. So there are times when I'll stop.
There's a lot of power in naming stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and then sometimes it's helpful if you're kind of spinning out a little bit to get a deck like this and flip through it until you find the cards that feel like they feel right. So sometimes it's an intentional flip through and pull, and sometimes it's a random pull and just see what comes through. What can you learn from that in that moment? But yeah, if I'm using this as part of like a more intentional shadow work where it's like identify and then do work, then I would use something like this to identify, and then I'd probably pull tarot to go what's the work with it. Or I would pull. There are certain oracle decks that have exercises, like Wisdom of the Shadow and Wisdom of the Divine Feminine both have like exercises to do or rituals. Another good one is the EDSA CONTEXT decks. I'm trying to think of what they're called now. There's like 3 now. And they all kind of do the same thing. There was the mystical healing cards. Then there was another one that had something
like a heal yourself one.
Yeah, heal yourself, and then I think mystical healing, and there's a third one out now, but EDSA is the creator. I don't have any of them anymore because I stopped reaching for them, but those are great for having like a task to do, or if you have any oracle deck that like gives you like a practice, like journal about this, or a deck that has prompts in it that are good journal prompts. Those kinds of things are really great. Or maybe pulling a self-care can be nice if you're in a really emotional space, but this is just really great. It's the only deck I can think of that really goes into the real depth and breadth of like what you might be feeling and experiencing. So it's a very validating deck to work with, but it can be really intense. So if you're like, I don't know what I'm feeling, and then you pull something like despair or defeat, you're going to be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And you can also, I feel like we're complex enough that like if you're really feeling like that, or you pull a really heavy card from this, you can pull like 3 or 4 cards and like really think about how all of those things are at play in that moment and like work with it that way. But it's a really powerful deck. I think it's wholly unique in what it does in the space. I don't think there's anything else that does this job exactly like this. And just the illustrations are very simple and easy to look at and easy. Like the actual emotion is like identified and like illustrated really perfectly. So, which it is in the Wisdom of the Shadow too. The Wisdom of the Shadow has a lot of this kind of stuff in it too. I feel like you don't necessarily need both, but I feel like they function differently for me. And the guidebook is great in here too. So
they feel like they would sit in different spaces. I have a deck that's similar that I feel like is similar to that. And in fact, when I was looking at between this deck and that one, because of the type of work I was doing at the time, I ended up choosing this one. This is the Iris Oracle.
I was just going to guess it was Iris because I remember having Candy Soul and Soil on for a Say Yes to the Deck. And she was trying to figure out if she needed Reclaim because she already has Iris. And I almost bought Iris. And then we realized they were very similar.
I feel like they are very similar. The thing that I feel like this one does in comparison. So this one says dependency. Fire Mother. I feel like the thing that this one does, I'm upside down is making it hard, making it hard on myself, is that it feels more into the, what I call the wounded inner child. So I paired this one a lot with the Chicoli Tarot.
Oh, that would be so powerful.
It's the powerful heavy hitter. But this, the way, there's something about this art style combined with
totally changed the way I see it now.
They're really good. Here, you want to see one together? Because I pulled it Chicoli just.
I definitely do. Yeah.
It feels like there's something about this really like childlike artwork. Just feels like it hits in a, I should make myself big, but like it feels like it just hits in that what I call the wounded child, which I guess is a very specific type of shadow work that I do.
A really powerful type of inner child healing. That seeing the Iris through the lens of like inner child work completely changes the way I look at it now. Damn it.
Well, and see, I was just sitting here thinking, I think I need the Reclaim because I was thinking that, oh, I don't need that because I have this one. But showing that one, hold some Reclaimed up next to it since we've both got them.
Oh my God. Can you imagine like doing one for like the inner adult and one for the inner child?
That's exactly what I was thinking when I was getting ready to say. This feels like inner child, and that feels like how you deal with the inner child as an adult.
Wait, what did yours say? The grief that, what was it say?
I gotta read it. The gallery of those who came before. What does yours say?
Security.
Wow. Okay.
And then this is criticism and smother. What the frick is happening right now?
Now we need both of them so we can do them together.
Stay back and passion. What is happening?
This is awesome.
Can't be caught and impatience.
Oh, that's kind of amazing.
Frick. Oh, what?
Let's throw Chicoli in there. Let's just do all three.
Okay.
So I got Justice. Can't see what I've got.
Okay, I've got Curiosity.
Okay, 8 of Wands, Justice, and Curiosity.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's kind of cool. Okay, that was really hard to do, but not the best way to be showing cards. But yeah, this one I got because I thought focus camera.
It's like, we're gonna focus up here now. We're gonna bring the focus back. No, we're gonna bring the focus back. I got it back.
Mine was just focus faster. It's just used to playing around.
It's terrible. Autofocus.
But yeah, I got this one and I wasn't like, I'm not going to get the reclaim because they feel the same, but I don't think they are. So now
I need the artist now.
I need the reclaim now because those together, and this is the kind of like, there are some things in here that aren't like there's rainbow transcendence, and there's some things in here that aren't like everything will be okay. This is a great affirmation message that isn't like, this is like when your friend tells you, like, hey man, you got this. I know shit's hard right now, but you got this. And that's the energy of this deck. But also, again, it's very into that sort of inner child.
Legitimately obsessed now. Great. It's great.
It's amazing. It's kind of amazing.
We literally cannot talk to each other we can't talk to each other without enabling each other to buy something.
I know.
That's just how it works.
Well, it's like me trying to make it through a hot takes without ordering something.
Oh my God, the last one.
I think I ordered 2 or 3 decks off the last, not the last one, but the one before.
The one before?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's dangerous.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
There's some epic Peggy rants in our last one. Should be
fun.
Yeah. The only other deck I have actually in this pile, although Chicoli is like my quintessential inner child one that I didn't think to grab, but I actually keep that one in my bag. It travels with me all the time because if I ever get my like poked at, like inner child poked at, it's a really good one to identify like what's going on there. But this is my number one. And when it comes to tarot, this is really the only one for me. Like there are other ones that do get into all my tarot, like you said, gets into the shadow. But if I intentionally want to find the shadow in a situation, or if I'm bringing any intentionality to, I need to see what's going on in the like lurking in the shadows. This is so perfect because there's something about the way that this deck is illustrated. This is the Deviant Moon borderless, by the way, since I didn't say it out loud. There's something about the way that this is illustrated that literally feels like it highlights the shadow. So like even here, I mean, this is a very classic positive card, Legacy, the 10 of Pentacles. Like, great, good. Look at this dude down here. Like, where is their exploitation? Where is their harm in that legacy? It's like, it's as if, I mean, even here in the Queen of Cups, like she's good, but like her cup is leaking. Like, you know, I mean, I just feel like you could see it that way anyways.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's something about this deck that makes me automatically look for the shadow. What's pulling our strings? You know, where are we overpowering instead of just, you know, I mean, I just feel like it's right there, easy to get. Why are we being dramatic? I don't know. So there's something about this that I love for that. And it's funny because I cannot get along with almost anything else Petric Valence does because it's all so dark and creepy. But like, it just really works for this.
That's cool. So that's like, I mean, if I had to say, you know, if somebody asked me what's Lisa's Shadow Work Tarot, that's the one I would say. Yeah, like, yeah, that's funny. I picked out like I had the other tarots here on the side, but I had the one tarot too that I feel like is like shadow.
What's your one?
The Somnia Tarot.
Yeah.
There's something about this deck that is just like, the Fool's on top. That's kind of cool.
That is cool.
It's just, I don't know. Like,
this felt so flat for me.
It's, I mean, like aesthetically speaking, it's like my jam, man. It is like, it's dark colors and it's like desaturated. I've seen the illustrated version and it looks completely different.
It does. Do you want the illustrated version?
I don't think so, only because I feel like this is unique. I don't have anything else that does this. The illustrated version, not trying to knock it or anything, but it feels like so many other decks I have.
Yeah, fair.
This in its own space. And like, I've been pairing this one with the Death Doula, and it's like,
oh, wow. That sounds potent.
Throw a Black Madonna in there.
Oh, geez. Yeah. It's funny because the Somnia is one that, like, I was looking at images of it online and I was like, this is such a powerful shadow work deck. And the moment I had it in my hands, I was like, it was like when we talked about personification, this was the deck that showed up and like its mouth was glued shut. Like it was not going to tell me anything no matter what I did.
That's so weird. Funny. That was the deviant move for me. You remember back when I did that whole month of like, I was trying to figure out what the hell it is everybody likes about the Deviant Moon. Because And like, it was fine. Like I had a nice month with it, but like, I feel the same about it. Like it's not my shadow work deck. This is my shadow work deck. That's so funny that it's the reverse for us.
Well, and it's why I always try to be careful, because I gush about the Deviant Moon borderless so much for shadow work, but then I'm like, this is true. This kind of comes back to what we were saying at the beginning of our chat, though. Like, everybody's engagement with shadow work looks different. Everybody's practice looks different, and the way that looks for you, works for you, how it functions is so unique to you. And so with that in mind, like, the decks that are going to be helpful for you is going to be wildly different also. Like, I want decks. The reason I like the Deviant Moon borderless the way it does is because it makes it difficult for me to ignore the shadow. So I can't gloss things over. I can't lie to myself with that deck. So it just helps. It keeps me honest when I need that. But yeah, it's interesting, because for me, I thought this was just going to be creepy and no good and whatever. And I got it and I was like, holy crap, it won't shut up. That sounds like the experience you're having with the Somnia.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And I had kind of the reverse with the Deviant Moon. So yeah, I think, and that's, I think, really important to keep in mind when you are like watching videos or like asking for recommendations on shadow work decks, because I see that come up a lot in like groups or, you know, chats and whatever. Like, what is one person's shadow work is different. And so the decks are going to be different too. So I think it's important to like keep that in mind. It's fine to take recommendations, but like also, like, be aware that if I say the Somnia Tarot is a great shadow work deck for me, it may not be for you, right?
The best question to ask yourself if you're trying to figure out what's a good shadow work deck and you already have decks is to ask yourself, from your current selection of decks first, what among the things I have makes it the easiest for me to peer into those hidden corners or see the things that aren't as easily seen or see below the surface, any of those kinds of questions, and then use that to inform what kinds of things help you do that. And then you decide, do you already have something that's doing that job for you? Because chances are pretty good most of us already have something that does that. Before the Deviant Moon, it was the Osho Zen or the Soul cards that I went to for that kind of work. The Deviant Moon just happens to be the most efficient at that process, but I already had things that did that job. So I think it's also important to like look at what you have and ask yourself, maybe you already have all you need in that category, and it's just about bringing more intentionality to the practice with that particular deck to go, okay, how can I take this deeper? How can I build that relationship more strongly? Because the other thing that happens too is that it's like having a toolbox. Who is it that uses this analogy all the time? Is it Dustin? Somebody uses this analogy all the time, that having all these different decks is like having a whole set of different tools, right? And so you might pull this tool for that job, or this tool for this other tool for the other job. And the thing about our decks is that the moment you start engaging with a particular deck consistently for a particular purpose, you deepen that relationship and that bond with that deck for that purpose. So you could pick your Rider-Waite-Smith and go, you know what, this is the deck for me. And then just bring intentionality for shadow work every time you work with the Rider-Waite-Smith. Next thing you know, Rider-Waite-Smith's going to be your shadow work
deck. That's your shadow deck. That's absolutely true.
Yeah. So much of it is like how you choose to engage with what you have. And for those of you that have like one or two decks, then you're bringing the intentionality of having a Swiss Army knife in each thing that you have. You know, it's the same thing. It's just what is your intentionality? I love having decks that I really strengthen their purpose with them. Like my decks for inner child work, I really strengthen that bond for that purpose. But the decks that I want to be all arounders, I keep as all-arounders, and I don't look to them to go to those very specific jobs. And it's like, yeah, you sort of like imprint on your decks, like what you want them to be.
Yeah. Hence, see our previous discussion via deck collections.
I feel like deck collections and personifications are both good episodes to sort of buddy up with this one. On
yeah,
we really like this. Really makes sense. I feel like we have a whole thing.
Good. Like it's almost like we know what we're doing, Lisa.
Almost, almost like that. Yeah. If you're watching this back and you have, you know, questions you want to ask in the comments below, please do. You can ask questions of me, of Dawn, of other people watching the video, or share your experiences and your thoughts on what shadow work looks like for you, how you feel about these various topics. We'd love to hear from you and have you participate in this conversation with us for sure.
And decks, because we love
yes, and share your decks. Yes, please.
Always deck recommendations.
Always.
We don't have enough, clearly.
No, definitely never enough. But I really appreciate that we get to do this together, because I feel like this is just brings that like chewy, meaty topic stuff to both of our channels, and it's really fun to be able to get into that stuff. So thank you for coming on here with me.
Thank you so much.
What are we doing next month?
So next month, we're going to be over on my channel and we're going to do tarot for past processing. So you'll see a little bit of shadow coming through in that too. So hopefully we'll be able to navigate some of that a little bit more as well. Because it's a big topic.
It's a big topic. And that will be on your channel next month.
That will be on my channel, yes.
So stay tuned to find out exactly when that's going to be. But for now, we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you for hanging out with us. We appreciate you so much. We'll see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.